My life changed like overnight. I used to have to pinch myself. How did this happen? But it did.
I still get plaintive calls from my accountant asking me if I could write another one of those.
How are we going to get out of here? They were waiting for us. There's girls in the car. It was insane.
The early 1960s was a tough time to be a Canadian performer. Canadian artists couldn't get on the radio like other international or US artists, but some did. What did it take for them to break through and be noticed? Bobby Curtola and Sylvia Tyson became prominent acts in their own genres during a time when most Canadian acts struggled. Bobby Curtola was Canada's first homegrown teen idol. Girls screamed for him, guys wanted to be him, fans bought his records in the millions. Disc jockeys couldn't wait to play his latest hit. For more than 5 decades, Bobby has been loved all around the world. And it all started at Grandma's house.
Being of Italian descent, you know, every Sunday we went to Grandma's house, and after dinner, the accordion would come out, and we'd all be singing all of the songs, all of my growing up years. And in those early years, my mother used to write songs, and my brother and I, Gary and I, used to sing them. I'd hold on to one edge of the fridge door. We'd hold hands in the middle. He'd have the other edge of the fridge door. We'd sing for the company.
Bobby Curtola grew up in the northern Ontario town of Port Arthur, now known as Thunder Bay. He started singing with a local band, and it wasn't long before his career took off like a rocket.
I was part of the band, and I sang backup for a guy named Brian Merritt. They let me sing a couple of songs. Brian was nice enough to say, listen, when we're doing my thing, it'll be Brian Merritt and the Country Wheels, and when it's you, it'll be Bobby and the Bobcats. It was the same band. So we started to play in the local area, did a local radio show, and the Hurden brothers were my songwriters. They were actually in the process of recording some of their music for posterity. And they approached me to sing on one side of the record. And I couldn't believe that somebody asked me to record in Thunder Bay, of all places, Port Arthur, Fort William in 1959. It was like a dream come true.
How I love you, always will. Please forgive me, say you still. Always let me walk along, hand in hand with you.
In 1960, Bobby's first record, Hand in Hand with You, written and produced by brothers Basil and Dyer Hurdon, was released. It was an instant smash, and Bobby was well on his way to fame, fortune, and pumping gas.
I used to work at my dad's service station, and I loved cars. I mean, I think it kept me out of trouble, you know. But I'd be pumping gas, and they'd be playing the records, and it was great because my managers tried to keep the publicity out of my hometown because it was sort of in a locked area up there in Northern Ontario. And I used to go back to school, and my friends would play the records at the local hangout. And in Thunder Bay, Port Arthur, was Pharaoh's Restaurant. It was just like Happy Days, you know, with the jukebox and the booth. And they go play some of my songs and tease me and get me to sing it or say, that was not as good as the last one. And it was really special growing up. My success started in Canada, and I was exported to America and all of those other places because of my Canadian success. And it was a little different because, you know, we were dreaming about making records, and it happened.
Once Curtola became successful, the Hurdon brothers tore up his original contract and made him a partner in everything.
I had a third of the record publishing, a third of the touring. I had a third of the record company. So I was a partner, and they were good to me. They were like family. The Hurdon brothers, for me, with my voice and the style, I sort of fit their genre of writing. And you know, you gotta have the right singer, but it's always about the song. And we just clicked wonderfully together. And when they passed away, it sort of, the writing side dried up for me a little bit. It was hard for me to find the next thing.
Recording studios and session musicians were rare in Canada during the early 1960s, so the Herdon brothers took Bobby to Nashville to record, using the same studio and many of the same musicians as Elvis Presley.
I tell everybody the vibrato in my voice back then was fear. When we started to record, it went from mono to 2-track, and now we're in Nashville at the B studio. Elvis has got the night sessions. I can't get the night sessions, so when he was in town recording, I only got his guys, because most of them, they all played on our stuff too. That's why the record sold.
Fortune Teller. 1962's Fortune Teller was Bobby Curtola's most successful international hit. But initially, Bobby wasn't totally happy with the recording.
I wanted to put the tell me, tell me, tell me on the bridge. And they wouldn't let me do it in Nashville because the session was over. They didn't want to. So we had driven down to Nashville, and we're on our way back to Thunder Bay, and I was on them for the whole trip, right? So they finally gave in. They said, okay. So we drove into Minneapolis, looked in the phone book, found the studio, and we went in, and they let me do the overdub.
Tell me, tell me, tell me, will we meet?
It was the biggest selling record we ever had.
Bobby Curtola thought he was on top of the world with the success of Fortune Teller, but bigger and better things were on the horizon for the teen idol. As Curtola became more successful in the U.S., he was invited to join a Dick Clark tour, along with stars Roy Orbison and Brenda Lee. Even though the artists all traveled together in one bus, Bobby says he loved every minute.
It was wonderful. Are you kidding? And what was interesting, because depending on where your song was on the chart, that's how you went on in the show. As Fortune Teller was out in the United States and we were on the tour, it was interesting how I started to move up, you know, in the show. It was a thrill to be with everybody. You know, it was a different time. There was a camaraderie with all of the entertainers where everybody wanted to help each other. It was a great time.
The success of Fortune Teller took Bobby all over the world. On a trip to England, he appeared on the hit TV show Thank Your Lucky Stars. Bobby almost didn't make it out alive.
We were on with our song, and Fortune Teller was out at the time, so I'm on the show, and I'm meeting all of these famous English stars, and it was a thrill. So the kids are outside the studio at the end of the show, and they're screaming, and we're waiting to see who they were waiting for. Everybody leaves. I'll never forget, my manager, Basil, was on tour with me. Everybody had left, and they were still there. They were waiting for us. He looked at me, I looked at him. We said, how are we going to get out of here? So now the security's taking us through the back lot. Now this big limo's sneaking around the side to the side gate. He's over there, he goes like this. Nobody's on the street, so they open the side gate to let me out. We only got to the sidewalk. And all the kids, it was amazing. Now my manager's got me from behind, he's got me under him, he's dragging me with his hands, walked like this through the crowd into this limo. And we're worried about the paint, and there's girls in the car. It was insane.
In 1964, Coca-Cola signed Bobby to an exclusive contract as a spokesman and goodwill ambassador. It was a successful relationship that lasted for years.
Who thought I'd end up doing Coca-Cola commercials? That was a shock for me. That really was a big success. We figured Curtola, Coca-Cola, and I was the first guy to make a commercial sound like a top 40 record in the world. Today, I still have fans come to the shows with a Coke bottle, because I used to give the 6-packs away on the show. I'd do the commercial, and Coke would give me as much Coke as I wanted to give away. Then it was like a hit record for me.
Bobby's good fortune continued when the Hughes Hotel chain hired him for a gig in Las Vegas.
So I got a 2-week booking, I got a standing ovation every show for 2 weeks. I started in the Gold Cup Lounge where Sinatra started. Walter Kane gave us a multi-million-dollar contract He never forgot me. I played for 30 years for Hughes, all those hotels.
Bobby Curtola reached for the stars and became one. He's had a lifelong career filled with more than a dozen gold records and a dozen gold albums, network TV shows, sold-out tours, and adoring fans. He's a businessman. He's supported charities around the world. He's been showered with awards and honors, a star on the Italian Walk of Fame in Toronto, and a Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal in 2012.
I look back on my life, it's like a dream. And what's interesting is when things are successful, everything you do works. So what happens is this snowball just keeps getting bigger, and all you have to do is your part. The public don't see you anymore, they see it. And the it, they put Bobby Curtola's name on it. You can never own Mount Everest. I feel very fortunate to be one of the many that got to climb it, and I saw that view. And when I turned around to say to everybody, look at there was another guy saying, hi, Bobby. And it was my time to go back down the hill. But it's really the process, which is how I got there. Music, music.
The international language of music has the ability to open doors, even ones that were slammed shut. But what happens if you're not a teen idol? What happens if you're the bohemian woman who writes folk songs? Sylvia Tyson, one of Canada's most famous folk and country artists, had to do what many Canadian artists did during the 60s. Make it big in the US first, before returning to Canada and gaining worldwide success.
I think I'm always a Canadian at heart. I was born here, raised here. My roots are definitely here. I think that a lot of my writing is influenced by that experience.
Sylvia Tyson is a true Canadian treasure. She was a folk music pioneer as one half of Ian and Sylvia. She's been honored with the Order of Canada, as well as membership in several halls of fame. The first song she ever wrote was a worldwide hit. She's hosted programs on both CBC radio and television. She co-founded the Songwriters Hall of Fame, as well as the group Quartet. So where did all her incredible talent spring from?
Both of my parents were musical. My mother was trained as a classical pianist from the time she was about 5, and she was an organist and choir leader. So you can imagine where I spent a good part of my young life, in the choir stalls.
Sylvia Ann Fricker was born and raised in Chatham, Ontario. Her early musical influences were the rhythm and blues songs she heard on late-night radio from Detroit. Then one day, that changed.
I'm not quite sure how that happened, except that I had an older sister who started bringing home books from the library that were folk music books. And I would say that most of the early folk music that I got into for books because there weren't really any recordings. And living in Chatham, Ontario, I didn't get to hear much of that.
In 1959, Sylvia moved to Toronto and quickly became part of the folk music scene, along with her singing partner, a handsome young cowboy named Ian Tyson.
Ian and I were kind of the Kansas City stars in Toronto. And I think that at a certain point we realized that we didn't want to just play in Toronto. We wanted to be playing outside of Toronto. And at that point, in the Canadian market, there weren't that many places to play. So we decided we needed to attempt to hit the big time and went down to New York. Pretty much the first door we knocked on was that of Albert Grossman's. So we auditioned for Albert right in the middle of the floor in this huge office that he had on Central Park West. As I recall, his response was, well, I really like what you do, but I've just signed this trio and I don't know how much time I'm going to have for you. And that, of course, was Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Albert Grossman did sign Ian and Sylvia and continued to manage them throughout their career together.
The criticism against Albert, I think, at that time and later on, had to do with the fact that he was a businessman in a very unbusinesslike era of music. And I'm eternally grateful to him for being just that, because he certainly saw to it that we not just had good management, but a good agency, a record company, legal advice, and financial advice as well.
Ian and Sylvia had been a couple for a few years, but it took a little prodding from Ian's mother to make it legal.
Marriage was really not on my mind at that point, but Ian had taken a trip home to visit his mom, and she basically said, "How about it?" And he came back and said, "I guess we're getting married."
As one of the pioneers of folk music in Canada, Sylvia Tyson was definitely gaining momentum in her career. She had married her singing partner Ian Tyson, and the two of them were off to New York City to make it big. In New York, Ian and Sylvia lived in a Greenwich Village apartment and hung out mainly with fellow musicians. One of their friends was a young singer-songwriter from Minnesota who called himself Bob Dylan.
You know, knowing Bob Dylan as we did, who was, of course, extraordinarily prolific, even at that point, he was just this guy that we knew that wrote songs, and if he could write songs, we could write songs. So we all started writing at that point, and as luck would have it, Ian's Four Strong Winds was Ian's first song, and mine was You Were On My Mind. And I still get plaintive calls from my accountant asking me if I could write another one of those.
When I woke up this morning, you were on my mind.
You Were On My Mind was a top 5 hit for the group We Five, who added a rock beat to the song.
I got troubles, oh, I got worries, oh.
They also changed a couple of Sylvia's original words.
You know, I wasn't that happy that they had done that, but I absolutely understood why they did it, because radio at that point would not use the words drunk and sick in a song. So, you know, no hard feelings, but it wasn't the way I wrote it.
I got drunk and I got sick and I came home again.
Hey, I bless them for it. It's still paying the rent.
As musical tastes changed in the late 60s, so did Ian and Sylvia's sound. Out of a Nashville recording session in 1969, the Great Speckled Bird emerged.
We decided that we didn't want to go on the road again, and yes, unless we could sound the way we sounded on that record. And out of that grew the Great Speckled Bird.
Ian and Sylvia recorded over a dozen albums together. Since their split and subsequent divorce in the mid-70s, Sylvia's released nearly that many solo records. She's also recorded with and performed with Quartet, a group she co-founded in 2000.
We all got together, and we realized as we were running material that we all knew each other's stuff and that we were all harmony singers. And we started singing on each other's stuff, and it started to sound pretty good. So that's what we did.
Ian and Sylvia performed at the very first Mariposa Folk Festival in 1961. For the 50th anniversary in 2010, they were booked as separate acts, but the audience wanted more.
The anticipation in the air was very heavy, although Ian and I were not scheduled to perform together. So when I came off stage from doing my show in the evening concert, Ian was there, standing there listening to what I was doing, and I just turned to him and I said, I think we have to do this, you know. And he said, okay, I'll call you up when we start, and that's what happened. I have to say there wasn't a dry eye in the house except for Ian's and mine.
When it comes to retirement, Sylvia Tyson just doesn't see that in her future.
I think it's true that that people who are doing creative work, and probably people who are doing work that we wouldn't consider creative, but who enjoy their work. I mean, why would you retire if it's not forced upon you? I'll probably still be limping out on stage when I'm in my 90s if they allow me to do it.